Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Great, thank you and good morning. This is a great turnout for an education symposium, so great to see all of you here. I'm going to start off, first of all, explaining DataONE, which is the basis for the education materials that I'll be talking about in the next few minutes. The DataONE is based on the premise that we are facing a lot of grand challenge problems these days with respect to climate change, invasive species, a whole array of issues as you see here, clean energy, and so on. And in order to address these problems, we really need a workforce that is poised to work collaboratively in teams and then bring to bear new tools and new ways of thinking in order to address some of these challenging issues. So that leads to DataONE, which is a project funded by the National Science Foundation, and we've been in existence for almost 3 years now. And DataONE is cyber infrastructure that supports three major components. One is what we refer to as member nodes, and these are data repositories or data centers that are scattered worldwide that hold biological, ecological, environmental, and earth sciences data. And essentially all the data that are necessary to address some of those grand challenges I showed on the previous slide. And these data repositories typically serve a specific constituency. They're associated with either a library, university, research network, governmental or non-governmental organization, and so on. The second key component, though, that we're actually building, we're not building new repositories because there are already a large number of those, but we're building the cyber infrastructure glue or interoperability solutions that make them work with one another. And basically, DataONE provides 24/7 backup for all of the metadata that are associated with all of those repositories worldwide. It indexes it and makes it easy to discover not only the metadata, but the data that underlie that are associated with the metadata records as well. And in addition to that, we provide replication services, so it's easy to back up from one repository to another. And we sort of follow the locks principle, lots of copies keep stuff safe, and lots of security and other services we support as well. And then a third component that we recognized early on from the scientific community was that not only do scientists want access to data, but they want to be able to access those data through tools that they normally use on a routine daily basis. And these are tools that they're familiar with, like Excel, like different types of analytical tools like VizTrails, Kepler, R, MATLAB, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the key cyber infrastructure pieces of DataONE is this investigator toolkit that supports that element. So I'm going to preface my talk by first of all explaining what the data lifecycle is, at least according to our perspective in DataONE. And normally it starts off at the top with planning, and this follows the NSF and NIH and other requirements for data management plans, which should ideally be done before you start your project. And then it goes through the collection and organizing phase of collecting data, organizing it via spreadsheets or databases or however you organize the data to meet your particular analytical needs that you've thought through as part of the planning process. And then in quality assurance, quality control, data description, this is typically known as metadata for probably everyone in the audience here. Preservation, and then a lot of projects that are governmental based or non-governmental organizations, they may stop at that point, the preservation, and then publish the data and make it available at that point. Other projects that are based on synthesis and integration and so on, meta-analysis, they may actually start at the discovery portion and discover data that are already preserved and then perform integration across multiple data sets so that they have all the data brought to bear on a particular problem. and then the data integration and analysis and visualization. So that sort of brings the life cycle full circle, completes the loop on the data life cycle. One of the key areas that we've focused on in DataONE since its inception is trying to understand the user community. And we do this by surveying and interacting with scientists, librarians, again, the whole array of different stakeholders. And I'm going to give you a vision for that in the next slide here, which is this. This is a really interesting paper if you've not gotten a chance to see it yet. It's by Carol Tenneper and others that are associated with DataONE. And it's entitled Data Sharing by Scientists, Practices, and Perceptions. And we have surveyed a large number of scientists, environmental earth scientists, and others, and asked them, what are some of the challenges you have to data sharing? What are some of the challenges you face with respect to managing data in general? And interestingly enough, there are lots and lots of challenges that the average scientist faces. One of which that I think we all can resonate with here, possibly, is the difficulties associated with the scientists have with identifying metadata standards that they can use and metadata tools. And as part of this particular analysis, and the survey results indicated that 90% of the scientists surveyed either did not use a metadata standard, or they used, more commonly, they used a metadata standard that they developed in their own laboratory. So that leads to a plethora of standards that are out there, and it makes it really hard to support interoperability across data sets, and as well as integration and analysis. So with that as a preface, again, we've largely tried to understand what the scientific community needs with respect to education and so on. So we've gone out, surveyed, and asked them specifically, what are your particular needs? What don't you understand? What do you understand? And so on. So that leads to my talk today, and I'm going to talk in the next few minutes about what we're doing in DataONE with respect to education. We support 3 different levels here. One is we provide a best practices database, and secondly, we provide a software tools catalog, and then 3, we support in-depth training, and all of which have been requested by the community, and they provide lots of feedback on the tools that we developed. So this is the best practices database that's part of DataONE. You can see the data lifecycle there, as well as the tag cloud on the left. If we step through this, if you look up to where the arrow is, it points to a best practices primer. And one of the things we realized was that scientists oftentimes want a sort of a quick primer in terms of how to manage data. And this is a total of 11 pages, including a 3-page glossary at the end that explains a lot of the jargon that a lot of scientists just aren't accustomed to in their daily life. So this is a real quick summary in terms of how to manage the data and supporting the data lifecycle that I showed previously. The next step is actually looking at any one of the, or coming up with posing questions that relate to different aspects of the data lifecycle. So let's pick one here under describe, which is adding metadata. And we can then, if we click on that, it'll take us to a whole array of questions or issues related to metadata composition or describing data sets. And then we can go and look at more depth at a response or an answer to this issue. And it provides a simple one-pager. That's the other thing we learned from talking with scientists is if they have a question, they don't want a 30-page technical manual that you point them to and say, well, read this. They want a one-page quick response that answers their question as directly as possible. So we gathered literally dozens and dozens of questions from scientists that they had and created these one-page responses that provided a quick answer to the questions, some examples of best practices, and then pointers for additional information, which is something they also requested. And we have this literally for all elements of the data lifecycle now, and it continues to grow on a monthly basis as we add in new new best practices. Similarly, with the software tools catalog, you can go and either you can do a search, as I show on the right black box there, but you can also click on any one of the tags like visualization. And in this case, it'll bring up a whole array of visualization tools. You can go and click on one. Let's say you want to learn more about ArcGIS Desktop, and then it'll take you to a one-pager that again describes that particular software package. It provides information about the technical expertise necessary, the cost, whether it's free or there's some kind of cost basis associated with it, and additional information. There's pointers there to not only additional information about the tool, but potentially training exercises as well. And then we get into the in-depth training part of it, and this illustrates the 10 education modules we've developed around the data lifecycle, and these can be incorporated into either a workshop format or they can be taught, downloaded and taught as part of classes. So we encourage faculty to download these education modules and then teach them in their, develop courses around those at their particular institutions. So let's click on one just to see what's involved. Again, we based the education modules on lots of feedback from the scientific community in terms of what kind of information they felt they needed and what they wanted to impart in their classes if they so taught these. So this brings us into lesson 10, which is analysis and workflows, and credits associated with the people that developed this are located up here. And then here are the lesson topics, and there's a big emphasis here on workflows. Again, it's expected that a lot of scientists have a pretty good understanding of with respect to the specific analytical tools they need that meet their, or that are commonly used in their particular disciplines. And then we have learning objectives associated with each of the learning modules, and these are very specific. And then we go into the module itself, and you can't see this, but this is an entire module. You can see that it's 32 slides that are incorporated into this. And the idea is to have a reasonably short presentation. Most faculty, most students, they don't like, hour-long talking heads presentations. They want something cut down into bite-sized chunks. And this is probably about the maximum you can get away with and keep people's attention. So this is around 32 slides. And following this, there are a number of exercises then that are incorporated into the classroom exercises. So there's a lot of hands-on, experiential-based type work that's added to the talking heads presentation as well. We've now gone through this and run this via courses and as individual training workshops, and received a lot of feedback from those participants that took the workshops. And we've learned a number of lessons from that, which I'll go through here one by one, just to give you some sense in terms of how to optimally design a course that really meets and captures the attention of your audience. And the first one was to use concrete or real-world examples and stories to illustrate important points. And this came out number one in virtually every response we received from everyone that's taken the course. Not only did they like the examples that we incorporate in there, but we suggested that we add more. So they want to see it really, resonate with them directly. The second point is include information about and links to tools and resources. So the students, in this case, would always like the opportunity to go and often learn more about a particular topic. So whenever you have a module, add in additional links and resources that people can go and delve a little bit more deeply into a topic on their own free time. The third point is use text sparingly. This slide would not pass through muster with our the trainees that took the prior workshop. So far too many bullets on this slide. Stick to 2, 3, or 4 bullets on the slide and keep it as short as possible. Define the jargon. And that's something that's quite often very difficult for us to do. We become enamored with the terms that we use on a daily basis, like metadata. We think everybody should know what metadata is, or data-intensive science, or whatever terminology we use, but that's not really common out there in the real world. So we need to make sure that we define every piece of jargon that's part of our lexicon. Fifth is take data management experience levels into account. And this also applies to recognizing that if you're offering a workshop on managing data, you're already predisposing the expertise and skill levels of your audience to some extent. The people that are coming to your workshop or that are participating in this class, they have an interest in the topic, and they probably have some background in it as well. So too often what we do in a lot of data management or informatics training is we come off as preaching to the choir, so to speak. So we emphasize the value of data sharing and this, that, and the other. And if the people weren't in the audience, they probably wouldn't be interested in data sharing to begin with. So we don't need to preach that story over and over again. 6 is include information about best practices. And there's several good ways to do this. One example that we use a lot is show bad examples. And this works really well. So for example, something like organization, or collection and organization of data. One thing that really resonates with people is show them the god-awful worst Excel spreadsheet that you've ever seen in your life. It's got colors in it, it's got data and results conflated, it's got multiple tables in there, it's got cells that include paragraphs where it should be some kind of date-time format. Use that as an example to show ways not to do things. And then show examples in terms of how to clean that spreadsheet up and actually have it be optimized for use and reuse. And then finally, for a workshop format, remove a lot of the redundant information. So if you're doing something on a semester course, the content of each module is probably going to be somewhat redundant from one to the next, because repetition is good. But in a workshop that's compressed into 1 or 2 days, you can remove a lot of that redundant information. And this is all in a 70-page document that was just released this past week that goes into a lot of detail about, again, how to organize and develop these courses. Finally, another course that we've developed over the last 3 years is called the Walter E. Dean Environmental Information Management Institute. And this was, again, with generous support from Dr. Dean himself, who's retired from the USGS. And he recognized that a lot of the students and people that he hired at the USGS simply were not prepared to tackle a lot of the data management and analytical challenges that they faced. And he really wanted to see, a specific course set up so that master's level, advanced level undergraduates and other professionals could go through this course and in a short period of time pick up a lot of good hands-on skills. And this is a 3-week course that we offer every year, and it provides 6 graduate credits. It's very, very heavily focused on hands-on experiential based training. So the students that take this, they get experience with all elements of the data lifecycle. I don't show necessarily all of the pieces and parts here, but they learn how to use the data management planning tool. They learn how to more effectively use Excel and PowerPoint. They get there really in-depth with R over the 3 weeks. That's one of the sort of basic packages that is common throughout the entire period. MySQL, ArcGIS, there's a full week on ArcGIS, and then Kepler for scientific workflows, and then they also get to experiment around with MyExperiment, which is a workflow repository system. And then they also learn about web design and use Drupal as well. So the whole goal of this course is to, again, get them thinking about the tools and using those tools that support different elements of the data lifecycle, as I show here. And this has proven to be extremely effective. We've gotten terrific feedback from all of the students that have taken the course, and they really like the fact that it's 90% hands-on and as opposed to 10% that are talking heads type presentations. And instead of being a 40-hour week course, this quite often is 60 to 70 hours just because the students are so engaged in the hands-on activities. So I would encourage you to look at DataONE.org. Not only do we support a lot of the cyber infrastructure that I showed previously, the search engine and so on, to discover data that might be of interest to you in the environmental sciences. But also on the bottom here, we provide a lot of resources, as I discussed previously, the best practices, software tools catalog, and then lots of education activities as well that we support through DataONE. And then finally, I would have to provide acknowledgement for all of the individuals that contributed to the best practices and software tools catalog, as well as the education modules and the Summer Institute for Training. And lastly, I want to again acknowledge lots of people that have been involved with DataONE since its inception, which was really about 5 or 6 years ago. We started planning DataONE well before we even knew there would be a solicitation for data nets, just because we recognized the need in the community. And we've had lots of additional support over the years, as you can see on the bottom panel there. And with that, I'll stop and turn it over to the next speaker, unless there's time for questions.
We'll take a couple minutes for questions. I'll bring the microphone to anyone who has one.
Don't all jump up at once.
See if I can fumble over a question here. I think, so one thing that we're interested in is sort of opening up the black boxes of data sets once they're uploaded. And not to really accuse you of having black boxes. I mean, they're CSV files and they're Excel spreadsheets, so they're sort of open in some sense, but you can't really do much with them server side with many of the repository efforts, right? All you can find them, which is fantastic, and there's metadata, and that's fantastic, but then the next step is download it locally and do something with it. Although maybe my experiment changes that a little bit. Querying them, querying across two multiple sources, writing one, say, SQL query that is able to access data set that this guy uploaded and compare it with this that someone else uploaded on your servers seems highly desirable. And I guess I was want to ask the question: is that a requirement that you see sort of coming down the pipe?
I'm sorry, could you ask the question again? The last part of it.
How valuable is server-side queryability as opposed to just discoverability?
So I'm going to dance around this because the way that DataONE is designed is, first of all, to address the problem that we have right now, which is it's impossible to discover the data that you need to address one of those grand challenge questions. We have one working group that focuses on bringing real-world use cases to bear. And for one project we did that was looking at the continental scale migration of birds, we needed 31 different data layers, which were impossible to discover. Some of them were discoverable, but others were well hidden. One, in fact, we heard about through word of mouth because it was in a scientist laboratory at the University of Utah. So what DataONE, first of all, tries to do is promote the discovery of these data resources that are typically associated with individual siloed repositories that are, unless you're really an expert and know about the existence of all these repositories, you wouldn't know that the data even existed. So that's the first goal, is to promote discoverability and accessibility of the data and metadata. The second one that we're working on is adding in semantic mediation tools that help ease the process of data integration. So you can download data from whatever repository it's located at, and then using these semantic mediation tools and ontologies, more easily integrate those data sets. Because that's one of the real challenges that we've seen in the community, is the data integration part of it. So that's where a lot of our work is, research and development is occurring right now, is in two areas. One is semantic mediation and ontologies, and then secondly is in provenance tracking. And that's another way to promote reproducible science. So we've got a lot of very active research going on in that area. So I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but the data themselves are are located in all the individual repositories. And then we provide another service, which was replication. But we don't have all the data centralized. We do have the metadata centralized. So, and there's one in the back.
Yeah, when talking about Earth observational environmental data, we should also have those massive satellite data imagery. Archive maintained by agencies in the radar. So I guess my question would be, what would be the relationship between the DataONE and those existing massive satellite imageries archive maintained by, for example, NASA, NOAA, and the USGS, and to which extent they could collaborate with each other? Thank you.
Yes, that's the basic premise for DataONE, is to provide the interoperability across all of those repositories that hold relevant data. And for the questions that I showed, you're absolutely right. Remotely sensed data is key. We really need to be working across the entire pyramid, from broad scale data like remote sensing data, GIS data, and so on at the bottom of the pyramid, all the way up through more extensive data that are associated with long-term ecological research sites located worldwide and others, as well as some of the examples we saw yesterday of Ocean Observatory and NEON and others that are developing, that have a very small number of sites but very intensive collection across a whole array of parameters at each of those individual sites in a particular ecosystem. So right now we have, as part of our initial member nodes that are part of the DataONE Federation, we have NASA and DOE, one of our first member nodes. USGS was early on in the game as well. And then we have plans to bring in lots of others that hold remotely sensed data, as well as one of the next likely one will be the National Oceanographic Data Center as well. So we're looking at a whole array of atmospheric through oceanographic through land-based environmental data as well.
Okay, I think we're about out of time, so let's thank Bill.
Okay, thank you.